We're basically building a very large, fully autonomous pickup truck of the skies, if you will. Everyone says product market fit, but I think it goes like one dimension beyond that. Founder product market fit. Oh, I have this great idea. I'm going to make this X widget and I'm going to sell it to the US government or the military. And the number one question is like, well, how do you know they want that?
Our guest today has over 20 years of experience in aerospace and defense at both Northrop Grumman and Starburst. He's the co-founder and CCO of GridAero, which builds ruggedized long-term autonomous aircraft, which revolutionize cargo logistics at scale. Everybody, please welcome Brandon Florian. All right, Brandon, thanks for joining us today on the Drone Wars podcast. And I've got to say, you have a really nice hat on your head right now.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, for having me on. I'm glad that we're able to bring out the UCLA colors for this special podcast between two fellow Bruins.
Yeah, you have to go to UCLA to get a Bruin Firestorm hat. So I'm glad you're in the club.
I think it's the best kept secret from your company. It's kind of like the Secret Bruin Society t-shirt.
Oh, do you have one of those?
I do.
It's definitely my favorite UCLA-related Instagram account. Those guys are on point, man.
Yep. You should totally add your hat to their paraphernalia.
That's a great idea. I'll message the guy and I'll send him some gear. So actually, before we get into all this stuff specifically around your background, there was a topic on the internet that I couldn't help but chime in on where some VCs were talking about how like they had access to all these incredible founders because they worked at Anduril, Palantir, and SpaceX, right? And what I've seen with a lot of VCs as well is if you didn't go to, basically Stanford or MIT, they almost dismiss you. How have you found that experience? I mean, as a fellow state school alumni like myself.
Funny, yeah. I've also noticed that in the past. VCs definitely do have a preference. I will say that I am lucky enough that two of my co-founders are Cardinals, so they are from Stanford. So that kind of like checks the box for VCs. I kind of get like where the mindset is at that like if you're not from Stanford or MIT or one of the other Ivy Leagues that you're doing something wrong. But I think there's a lot to say, for the fact that like UCLA has been like the number one public university in the nation for the last 8 years. And it's pumping out amazing alumni and amazing research and technology, and has been since, they created the internet 50 years ago. So, VCs shouldn't sleep on that.
I totally agree. And what I've actually found now kind of over 10 years of hiring people in the defense space, the irony of listing Anduril when so many people from Anduril come from General Atomics seems to be lost on everybody.
Yep.
It's incredible. There's a lot of really good, big primes that do have make really good engineers, right? And a lot of it is process and teaching you how to think critically and how to solve problems with data.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a former Northrop Grumman alumni. I spent over a decade there, at Space Park in Redondo Beach, California, and got to do, a lot of cool things, not on the engineering side, but exposure to the engineering side. Even though my background's engineering, I did spend a bunch of time more on the, the BD side and strategy and innovation and tech scouting and basically finding ways to identify early stage startups that might have a particular, overlap with our portfolios, and then bring them into the fold and find ways to work with them and collaborate with them. And I think Northrop is still one of the primes that continues to be a good job in doing that, but they fly very under the radar because they're very strategic on how they do it. They're not like a Lockheed Martin Ventures where they just throw millions of dollars at everybody and see what sticks. They take a more deliberate approach.
Absolutely. So that's a great segue into, you've already started to introduce yourself, but tell us what you're working on.
Yeah. So, co-founder for a company that some people might have heard about, GridAero. We just came out of stealth over the summer with our prototype aircraft, but we're basically building a very large, fully autonomous pickup truck of the skies, if you will, that's meant to move around logistics in contested areas and remote areas, both for defense or commercial applications.
So tell me a little bit about kind of, your journey, and how did you decide to go from, big prime to startup?
Yeah. So, I guess the journey started back at UCLA. Was kind of finishing up my aerospace engineering degree. And, as much as I loved engineering, I realized that I didn't want to be pigeonholed into being stuck in a cubicle for the rest of my career. So I decided to kind of expand my skill set and, do business school after engineering while working as an engineer. So I started doing satellite operations with General Dynamics, and we were supporting a Navy contract. So I used to work on a Navy base up at Point Mugu, and we used to, basically fly Navy birds out of there. So that was a good exposure to satellite operations, getting, exposure to the U.S. government and the way things work there. And then once I finished business school is kind of where I segued and switched from engineering to the dark side. And I went to, the business side of aerospace and defense. And when I went to Northrop, I got put basically as like a program cost manager, working with engineers, building multi-million-dollar platforms on space side stuff, and kind of being like that liaison between the engineers and business leadership, and kind of finding ways to make it a little bit better, if you will, very Office Space-ish, right? Like the dude that would always say I take the requirements from the customer and I take it to the engineers type of thing. But yeah, I mean that's that's a really important skill set. I think it's lost on a lot of people, being able to have technical breadth and understand what the engineers are working on, so then you can communicate it to people that are not technical at all. So, I did that. That's where I kind of got my feet wet at Northrop. And then, I got thrust into more of a business development type role. So it was very, forward facing to the customer. And then from there, that led me to kind of get told to what my next assignment was, but it actually ended up being a really cool assignment. So at the time, they were standing up a strategic growth organization that had everything to do with inorganic and organic growth for Northrop Grumman, specifically for aerospace systems. And so it was basically all M&A, due diligence. It was looking at how they engage with startups, and they had no idea how to do this. This was 2015 when the new space economy was just taking off, So my director at the time, he was yeah, I need to know more about these companies that are 20-something-year-olds building satellites in their garage. To them, the idea was absolutely foreign, and they had no idea how these people were doing it. So that's kind of what, the last few years of being at Northrop was for me. It was kind of wearing that technology scouting hat and bringing startups into the fold, while at the same time working on other, projects that were internal to the organization. So, really cool. I was part of the early due diligence team for the orbital ATK acquisitions. So, the best thing about working at a prime is that you just get exposure to so many things. And it's kind of you can cut your teeth on a lot of different stuff and gain, a very wide skill set of things. So then from there, funny enough, I was working with a company. I'd given a company out of Paris that had just moved to El Segundo, and they were called Starburst Aerospace. They were the first aerospace and defense accelerator that came out of the woodwork. I was probably their third U.S. contract after Raytheon and Boeing. And I got to be really good friends with the co-founder at the time, Van. And Van and I worked, intimately, bringing startups into the fold.
Van's a great guy.
Van is a great guy. Still a great friend of mine. I'm still, tracking everything they do. I see them on a daily basis, or not daily basis, but probably weekly basis, because we're in the same co-working space in West LA. And funny enough, like Asher, his partner at Generational Partners was one of my original interns at Starburst. So now they're crushing it. So I worked with Van, and then 3 years later, I was like kind of like tired of slamming my head against the wall because things are very slow to move in large defense primes. And Van gave me the opportunity to come work for him, and he's like, take your experience innovating for Northrop and help other primes innovate faster. So I basically joined him to grow the U.S. defense business that they had at the time, or should I say that they were starting up at the time, and expanded the portfolio to like work with a bunch of different primes then, and then did that for 3 years. Then the pandemic hit, and then I went to the space VC side for about a year, and then exited that, and literally like this fell in my lap, right? Like it was kind of like this person knows the CEO, and he connected me with my current CEO, and we hit it off, and I loved the idea that he was doing, and I said, let's do it. And so we started it.
All right, a lot to unpack there. Let me just put you on the spot here for a moment and ask, what primes who's doing a good job of innovating or working with small companies?
Number one, hands down, in my opinion, is General Atomics. General Atomics has been great at doing innovation, not just here in the US, but globally. So Brad Lunn, who runs Blue Magic Ventures over at General Atomics, I consider him a great friend. He was one of my customers when I was at Starburst. So I used to like do a lot of like pitch days for him and, bring him really cool companies to work with. Funny enough, like he was one of the main reasons like why Capella just like blew up. Because, he was able to see like, what they were bringing to the space sector. And, he was one of their original like champions within like the defense primes.
Brad is also a great guy. I am always amazed when I talk to startups. It seems like he is everywhere. They've talked to a million different companies, and they're trying to figure out how do they make their product line better with that magical like big company and small company kind of partnership. You know what I mean?
Yep, for sure. And then of course, like hats off to Chris Moran at Lockheed Martin's Ventures. They've been doing awesome for like the decade that they've been around. They've made some great investments, working with great companies. So, even though I think Lockheed Martin is still a large prime and like they're slow to move on certain things, I do, like kind of like tip my hat to them as far as like the fact that they're putting their money where their mouth is and backing some of these people that truly can use that type of venture funding for what they're doing.
Awesome. We like Chris as well. Full transparency, Lockheed is an investor in Firestorm.
Yeah.
And they've actually been pretty good. So let's talk a little bit about like some things you've learned in your career that I think are relevant to the autonomy space, right? Talk to me about, let's say this, like operational resilience of products, right? How do you kind of get there? How do you make a platform be able to be used in a variety of different settings and areas and, locations?
That could be a very like complicated answer, or that could be like a really simple answer. I think like at a very high level, operational resilience, like it comes down to when you start your engineering for whatever you're developing, keeping it simple is super important, right? Like the minute that you start to like make things complex is where like I think that operational resilience kind of breaks down a little bit. From our standpoint at GridAero, our operational resilience is based on the fact that the aircraft is super simple to maintain and operate, right? And that comes down to like, the COTS stuff, material that we use to build the aircraft structure, down to the way it's assembled and put together, down to the components that we're using, right? Like nothing is like super dependent on like complex engineering or exquisite top of the line, state of the art technology. Um, so that's just one example, like on engineering an operationally resilient platform.
Keep it simple. I love it. And it sounds like you guys are trying to take, a very smart approach by basically doing as much as you can with COTS parts so that you don't have to kind of build exquisite widgets to make your platform operationally resilient.
That's right. And I think that the number one thing that led us down that avenue is one, like my CEO Arthur, like he came from, he was early teams at Joby, designed and built the first aircraft at Joby. Then he was at X-Wing, was early teams at X-Wing, VP of engineering, so helped build the autonomy stack for what they were doing. So he saw already and was part of companies that do the ultra exquisite stuff, right? Like things that are like very complex in nature that are, pushing state of the art for like those markets. And, taking those lessons learned and then turning around and listening to what the customer really needed. And the customer was saying, yeah, it'd be great. This is awesome, but it'd be really great if, right? And that's kind of like how we went down the pathway of, engineering what we essentially have done with our aircraft at GridAero.
Okay, so you started by keeping it simple, right? And making the system very, very like easy to maintain by using COTS parts, right? Now, as you guys plan to scale your production, right? Let's talk a little bit about maybe some of the lessons you've learned over your career, because this seems to be one of the hardest things for all small manufacturing companies to kind of get right.
That's right. And from the get-go, I think we weren't married to the fact that we would produce all of these in-house or manufacture these or be vertically integrated to say we're going to need tons of CapEx to basically set up our own manufacturing line. And we said, look, this is simple enough where we can literally find a manufacturing partner that can work with us to do this. So we pursued that route, and we currently are pursuing that route, even though the first few tails of the airplane we're going to build in-house ourselves. But we've already, made pretty good inroads with a large manufacturing partner, OEM, that has pretty much signaled to us that they are willing to partner with us to help us get from low rate production to high rate production. And in the past, during World War II, this OEM has developed, tens of thousands of aircraft for the Department of War. So,
all right. So finding really good partners who actually understand and have the processes in place to take your low rate initial production to scale is how you guys are going to solve that. I think that's a great idea. Why do you think we don't talk about that as a solution as much in the defense ecosystem? It seems like everyone wants to own every step of what they deliver.
Yeah, I think it's just because just the nature of the business for so long to maximize profitability has been to vertically integrate everything. And for the longest time, defense primes were being rewarded for their cost plus contracts, and everything that they did in-house and built in-house, they can just tack on fees to and basically get more money for what they were doing. But then you start to see the problems now, because a lot of these legacy platforms, the government is vendor locked into I have to fix this. I got to go back to Corporation X to fix this widget or get a replacement widget. And who was it? The Secretary of the Army, when he was at AUSA, he was talking about, I think that one knob for the Apache, whenever it breaks, they have to ask for the full replacement, which is $40,000 for that one particular radio within an Apache helicopter. But they figured out that they could 3D print the replacement knob for 50 cents or something like that, right? So it was a huge cost savings for them. So I think for the last few decades, it's kind of it's almost been pro rata for everyone to vertically integrate everything. And keep everything in-house just so they could own the whole process, the whole shebang, if you will. And I think now, as we get into like a new era and a new, evolution of what defense primes are going to be in the future, I honestly think that the whole reindustrialization argument of like, the make America great again type of thing, and leveraging the defense industrial base here in the U.S., that's what's really going to drive, innovation and manufacturing capability here in the country.
How long do you think that's going to take? I mean, I think the administration today is really trying to wave a wand and make it happen overnight, but we have to just be realistic about the shortcomings in the supply chain, and the shortcomings in, able people who are able to manufacture. What's your take, man?
Yeah, I mean, I wish we could like wave a wand overnight and like start, cranking out whatever we needed, like, by, in my particular case, by 2027, because that's like the flashpoint for where our platform is going to be, most useful. But, I think it's, I don't want to put a number to it because, yeah, sure, we could all be wrong. But, I think if we were to start from now, just based on all the different people out there working to make this happen, like I think within the next 10 years, like we could really like make a dent in bringing back some greatness to like manufacturing capability here within the U.S. But that's going to take commitment from the government. That's going to take commitment from investors to back companies that are doing this. They're not going to be able to do it on their own. So it's really going to take a village for us to get there.
Let's switch gears for a second here, right? You've seen a lot of different companies of different sizes over the years, right? What differentiates successful companies from unsuccessful companies?
Number one for me would have to be like, everyone says product market fit, but I think it goes like one dimension beyond that. I think it's, founder product market fit, right? And I think founders play a really big role in the success of the company. And I'll take our industry as number one, example. Aerospace and defense is a very niche industry, right? Most people within this industry have lived their life within this industry. So they know the ins and outs and the nuances of the way the government works, the way the government buys things, people within the industry, right? And because aerospace and defense is built on trust and, it's built on trust and relationships, basically. For those trying to break into that industry as outsiders, I would say it's very hard, in the sense where, I'll give you examples. There have been companies in the past that founders say, oh, I have this great idea. I'm going to make this X widget and I'm going to sell it to the US government or the military or Space Force to do X, Y, Z. And the number one question is like, well, how do you know they want that? Right? Like, did you ever work this product in industry? Did you ever hear that this was a pain point? Or that let's just call it the war fighter, that this was something that they wanted, right? So usually they'll be like, no, I don't, but I think this is a really cool idea, right? So that's like a one red flag. Another red flag is like they have a really good idea, but they have no idea like how the government buys or acquires, and they have like zero insight into government BD, which we all know is like almost like black magic. In government BD, it's a long sales cycle. It's talking to hundreds of people just to get to the right individual. I think that not having that insight into how the DoD works for this industry in particular, that can make or break your company. Like if you don't understand that, hey, it might take us 18 months to land this contract, right? It means all the difference.
That's great. I mean, that last part right there is like so important. And I had a mentor when I entered this space that I found out of necessity. You know what I mean? Because I wanted to learn a lot about how to do this. But for anyone who's new to the space, the last minute of what Brandon just said is like literally the crux of what is required to build a defense tech company. It really is. It's not the best product that'll win. It's going to be the best go to market. And a lot of times that's understanding how to sell and find, the pocket of misfits within these massive organizations that actually want to bring in new technologies. So last kind of question or theme for you on today's podcast, right? Where do you see autonomous systems going? And it can be, this is a very broad question, right? So you can interpret this any way you want. You can do UAVs, UGVs, USVs. You can talk about autonomy software. I don't really care. The floor is yours. You've been around this for 2 decades. I'm really looking forward to hearing, where the magician thinks this is going.
I've seen a lot of cool autonomous stuff. I will say that to this day, I'm still impressed that a decade ago, Northrop with the X-47B was doing carrier operations fully autonomously and doing air-to-air refueling autonomously. To this day, I haven't seen any other company do it. Now, obviously, we have like the Neo Primes, like the Andurils, doing some really good stuff, like their Ghost Shark, their UUVs. I think that the future of autonomous systems is like, it's pretty much sky's the limit. Like, I think that like you could potentially find almost any use case that like you can think of, like at some point or another, there will be an autonomous version. Like I am truly still waiting for like the Minority Report where I can get in my car and my car will drive me where I need to go and I don't have to worry about it slamming me into the center divider on the 405, right? Look, we're seeing humanoid robots coming to people's homes now. I hope it doesn't turn into an iRobot moment either. I mean, I think it's going to, when it comes to like autonomous mobility and moving people around, I think that's the one that's going to take the longest to adopt. I think that people like inherently don't trust machines. Tesla's done a good job of getting them to trust like semi-autonomous driving. But I really think that like, if most people were to know that like the minute you jump on a jetliner, the aircraft 95% of the time is flying on autopilot, and pilots for the most part really just land the aircraft, if that, right, depending on the situation, right? I don't know if people would be as comfortable, but I mean, like it's gonna take time for let's just say Merlin, right? So Merlin has been demonstrating their autonomy, that it's crossing over from platform to platform. For airplanes that fly like 1 to 2 people, awesome. For what they're trying to do with C-130s, awesome. Also C-17s, great. I don't know like how well that's going to take anytime soon. Like if they were to say, you know what, we're going to put those in all of the 737s out there. I think that there might be a little bit of a pushback. Same with Archer just buying up Hawthorne Airport. Again, these are all great companies. I'm not like, I'm not bagging on them at all. Like, I'm not saying they suck. I'm just saying that like, they want to move people around for the Olympics, which is in 3 years, right? I'll tell you that I don't want to be one of the first people on those aircraft, right? Not because I don't trust it, just because no one ever wants to be like the guinea pig. No one wants to be the first one to do it on something that's so brand new. So I think that aspect of autonomous systems is probably going to take the longest to get to. Everything else that we're seeing as far as autonomous systems go, I think we're going to start to see a lot more use cases that we probably never even thought about come out of the woodwork in the next, 5 years, 5 to 10 years.
It's interesting because if you have ever used self-drive on the Tesla with someone who's never been in it before, they are actually very scared. And I've done this a number of times. And to your point on like autopilot with airplanes, when you actually look at why a lot of these airplanes crash, it's actually the human error, right? But there is something just fundamentally I don't know, like scary that a human who has been trained to do something is not in control, right? A human is not in the loop to actually make this happen. So I find that insight very fascinating. And I do think you're right. You know, moving around people in the air or on the ground or on the water without a human at the helm or the wheel or the stick, it's just kind of inherently scary still for our society. Maybe it'll take a whole new generation of kids growing up using in cars with autopilot, by Tesla to start breaking the, breaking the mold. I don't know. Well, Brandon, thanks for joining us today. We covered a lot of really awesome topics. If people want to be able to find you or reach out to you, how do you recommend they do that?
You can easily find me on LinkedIn, Brandon Florian. Grid.Aero will take you to our website. We also have a LinkedIn page. There's going to be a lot more news coming out in the next few months. So stay tuned for some of the things that we have cooking.
Hey, congrats on all your success, man. It's awesome.
Thanks, Dan. And to you as well. I mean, you're doing an awesome job rocking it with Firestorm. So.
No, we appreciate you. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Drone Wars podcast. Each week, we bring you fascinating conversations with leaders shaping the future of air, sea, land, and space technologies. Catch new episodes wherever podcasts can be found. Until then, we'll see you next time.